Hello and welcome back to The Cup That Cheers. I'm Elizabeth, and today we'll be talking about the next 3 things on my list of tools that I think hand sewers need when you start hand sewing. The next 3 tools on our list are the different kinds of fabric, different kinds of seam rippers and what they are and how to use them, and different kinds of measuring tools and why you need more than one. So, fabric. You'll definitely need fabric. The first kind of fabric that I recommend that you begin with when you're first starting sewing is fabric you don't have to pay for. Because when you first start sewing, you're just going to be practicing. You don't want to be practicing on expensive fabric or fabric that you spent money on, and then in case you make a mistake, then you feel like you've ruined fabric and wasted money. So, this is the kind of fabric that I recommend you begin with. This was part of an old bed sheet that someone gave me. So if you have access to old bed sheets are really, really good material to start with because they're easy to cut. They're cotton and polyester, so they're soft, they're really simple. Bed sheet fabric is not too tightly woven and too loosely woven. It's just very simple, and it's also really easy to find. So if you happen to have access to old bed sheets that have holes in them, don't throw them away. Keep them for practicing with. You'll use them not only when you're beginning to sew to practice stitches on, but you'll use them to do something called making a mock-up or making a muslin of any garments that you are going to be making in the future. Because again, when you start using patterns, you want to make sure that all the pattern pieces that you have fit together the way they're supposed to be, that they fit you. But that is much more advanced sewing training. I might do a video about fitting and cutting out a pattern and putting a pattern together in the future. Get someone to give you their old bed sheets that have holes in them, cut them up, or you can go to the thrift store and find them really easily. You want to make sure that the fabric is not only very plain and very simple and not too heavy, not too light, but that it's a woven fabric, not a knit fabric. Knit fabrics react differently than woven fabrics do. They're a lot stretchier. That's part of the point of having a knit fabric. But knit fabrics, because they're so stretchy in all directions, they can be very difficult to work with. So I recommend that you wait until you're more experienced working with woven fabrics before you start working with knit fabrics. And you'll be able to tell that a fabric is a knit fabric or not by when you look at the cut edge, or in this case a torn edge, you can see the threads that it's made up of sticking out of the edge. A knit fabric won't do that. When you cut a knit fabric, the edge looks like loops because that's how a knit fabric is put together. It's loops interlocking with other loops, and so when they're cut, you'll have half loops and you'll have whole loops, and the edge of a knit fabric that's cut is not stable like this. Like, you know, you can pull this and it doesn't automatically come apart. With a knit fabric, that's not the case. A woven fabric, if you look closely, now you might have to get glasses or a magnifying glass, depending on how your eyesight is or how tightly woven the fabric is. But you can actually see the individual threads that the fabric is made out of. And some will be going this way and the rest will be going that way. And you'll be able to see the weave. It doesn't matter if you don't want to use that fabric for a project, because your first project should not be anything you want anybody to see. It should not be anything useful other than something to practice your stitches on, because you're going to need to train your eye and your hand and your brain to work together, your small motor skills, to move that needle through the fabric in the way that you want it to go to make the stitches do what they need to do. So fabric, just a good cotton polyester. You can use an old sheet. You can use what's called quilting cotton at the store. I recommend that you go to a thrift store if you need to buy it. Buy it as cheaply as possible, because all you're going to do is practice making the stitches on it. And in a different video, I will show you how to make a sampler, which is what you use to practice your stitches. Anytime you're going to learn a new skill, you need to make at least one practice. Have something that you practice on. You just practice the different elements of it. In this case, it's the different stitches. So I'll show you how to do that. I'll show you how I had my students make a sampler, a stitching sampler of the 4 main stitches. And we'll do that later. Fabric that is not too heavy and stiff, because that will be difficult to put the thread through. Fabric that is also not too light and flimsy and flyaway, because that will also drive you crazy trying to do the stitches. Don't drive yourself crazy if you don't have to. So fabric is what you need. You'll also need something that I like to call the frenemy, and that is the seam ripper. Now, seam rippers come in a whole bunch of different shapes and sizes. The least expensive ones are pretty small, about 2 inches long. You can start with those. Those usually go for 99 cents at the fabric stores in my area. You can have those, that's fine, but if you're going to make an upgrade and you don't want it to be the magnetic pin caddy, I recommend that the upgrade be a seam ripper with a larger handle. So this is the one that I use. It's a good, measure my hand, good 5 inches long, okay? And it has a nice, a handle that is comfortable, long enough to be comfortable in the hand. It has, of course, a lid, because the business end of a seam ripper is very sharp. You can see the shape. And each end, each sharp point has a purpose. So the main sharp point, the largest point, is pointed like a knife and sharpened like a knife as well. That's what you're going to use to pick up, to slip underneath your stitches of thread, underneath, and lift them up and pull them out of the fabric. A seam ripper is used for removing stitches that have gone in the wrong place, or that the thread got all knotted up and it wasn't supposed to, and you have to take it out and redo it, or you need to change the color of the thread, or whatever. You would scoop underneath each individual stitch and lift it up out of the fabric. This red side, the red little cap on the point, is for actually ripping seams. So a seam is when you have 2 pieces of fabric, they put together like this, and you sew along one edge, and then you open it flat, and the seam is like the little bits, the little edges of the fabric that were sewn together. That's where the stitches are, and then the seam allowance, that's that excess fabric, hangs to the inside. If you need to, for example, resize a garment, make it bigger or smaller, you need to take out all of those stitches, and it's a real pain to pick out each stitch individually. So what you do is you turn the fabric wrong side up, wrong side up, which means the seam allowance side up, and smooth everything flat and away from the thread that's holding the seam together. And then very carefully, you're going to turn the seam ripper so that the red side is down, and you're going to put that directly in between the 2 pieces of fabric with the seam allowances folded back and away, so that the seam ripper is only touching the thread that's actually making the seam. And this curved part in between the 2 points is a knife blade. It's very sharp. So what you're going to do is you're going to push that, you're going to hold the end of the fabric and push that knife blade against the thread that makes the seam, and you're going to push that in a straight line down the seam, just letting the thread get cut, not the fabric. And this red point protects the surface of the table or whatever it is that you're working on from getting scratched. So this is a really good tool to have. You're definitely going to need it. It's your frenemy because you hate having to use it because it means you made a mistake, but it's going to save your bacon from having a project that is too small, too big, trim in the wrong place, stitches look weird, whatever. You make a mistake, you can take it out. It's not the end of the world, and the seam ripper will do that for you. Make sure you get one that feels good in your hand. You can upgrade further from the size. A lot of seam rippers have ergonomic handles. That's also an option, and a good option at that, if that's something that you want. And the last thing that you really need is some kind of measuring tool. You saw me earlier use my hand to measure. That's a really good idea, because sometimes your measuring tape or your ruler is not going to be within reach, and you just need to measure this one little thing. So it's a really good idea to take a ruler and measure your hand, measure each one of your fingers, measure your hand length, measure your hand span, so that you can use your hand as a measuring tool, at least to estimate how many inches something is. But if you want exact measurements, you're going to need other kinds of measuring tools. So one of them is this. This is a seam gauge. Oops, sorry, showing the back. This is a seam gauge and a hem gauge also, it's known as. And it has a little slider that marks different points, whatever point you want on the measuring, the ruler part of the seam gauge. And this is really good for measuring how big, how wide your seam allowances are, how deep your hems are, or you're going to make them, measuring how long small things are, how much bigger something needs to be, how much smaller something needs to be for small amounts of measurement, small amounts of distance. A seam gauge or a hem gauge is really good. Especially for measuring the body in 3 dimensions, you're going to need something flexible, and that is a measuring tape. This is mine. It has a little retractable, little button, retracts into the case, but you don't have to get those ones. You can also just get a big long tape and you just roll it and unroll it from the roll. And this is what you need to use when you're measuring your body or somebody else's body to make clothing, because you can make it go around in 3 dimensions. It's flexible. It's also very good for measuring long lengths of things like skirt hems or drapery hems or drapery lengths, things like that. So get yourself one of those. But if you don't want to buy a seam gauge or a measuring tape, you can start just with a regular old 12-inch ruler. So you can get your desk ruler and do that. It's difficult to take body measurements with a desk ruler because a desk ruler is straight and stiff and doesn't go around the body. But you can estimate. You can use a piece of string and wrap it around the body and then cut it at the correct width or correct length, and then use that to measure on the straight with a ruler. But you'll want to have at least one measuring option, and multiple measuring options are a good idea. If you want to upgrade measuring options, this is probably the first one that I recommend that you get, and that is an 18-inch clear plastic ruler. It's larger. It won't fit in your biscuit tin. Sorry about that. It's larger, but it's good for if you start making your own patterns for something, and you need a long straight edge. It's also good because it's clear plastic. You can see through it and you can see the markings and the measurements, and that really helps when you're trying to alter things or make things. But that's a little bit more advanced. You don't need that when you're first starting out. Thanks for joining me today as we've been talking about some more tools and supplies that you'll need as you begin your sewing journey. Join in next time as we'll talk about the last 3 things on my list of tools that I think beginning hand sewers need. We will be talking about beeswax and what it is and why you need it. We will be talking about bandages, and last but not least, we'll be talking about thimbles and what kinds of thimbles you need and whether or not you actually need one when you begin. Some controversy. If you have liked these videos, please click like, and please subscribe to the channel if you would like some more videos of this educational kind, as well as historical topics. I have some historic cooking videos coming up and some other interesting topics. If you have other topics also that you would like me to talk about, please put them in the comments below, some suggestions. I would love to hear them. And I hope you are able to use this information in your own sewing journey to make it a little less intimidating and a little more doable. If children can do it, so can you. So go forth and sew. Take care. Bye.